Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that no one can against us, that we're gonna keep fine. Of course, darling, it's always life, so come on and take the coat. I know it's cold, of course, darling, that is what you can see, that no one can against us, that we're gonna keep fine, that we're gonna have everything we want. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that those are difficult times, but we are gonna make everything fine. Of course, darling, we are gonna forget about them. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that we are here. Of course, darling, that is what you can see. You know I want some red honey. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that no one can against us, that I'm gonna keep that. Of course, darling, give me a kiss. Of course, darling, I'm gonna love you. Of course, darling, take the coat. I know it's cold. Of course, darling, that is what you can see. Take the coat because it's awful cold. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that no one can against us, that we're gonna keep fine, that we're gonna keep well, and that no one can against us. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that they are after us, but they cannot against us. Of course, darling, we are gonna go with the car and we are gonna go far away from everyone. Of course, darling, they are after us. They are trying to hound us. Of course, darling, they wanna hurt us, but take the coat. I know it's cold. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that I want some red honey. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that no one can against me. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that they want to keep everything from us. Of course, darling, but you know how life is. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that you don't have to hurt the people because it's some penalty, of course, darling, and you don't have to hurt people, and you have to let the people have 30 kids and don't hurt them. Of course, darling, that is what you can see. So is life, so it has to be. Of course, darling. Of course, darling, you know I want some red honey. Of course, darling, I want state intervention, market intervention. Of course, darling, that is what I want. Of course, and you know that. Of course, darling, so go on. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that I want some frontiers, of course, darling, and take care of the people inside, of course, and make some business and fabrics and things like those. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that it's only the freedom of the enterprises to slave the workers. Of course, darling, and you know that, and so we live. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, but we don't want that. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that we want some business and frontiers and things like those, and fabrics, and sell our things like we want, of course, darling, and don't sell them cheap and just keep some money inside us. Of course, darling, some mini loans they keep fast, of course, darling, but I don't want that. Of course, darling, you know that. Of course, darling, that's my theory. Of course, darling, and I know I'm right, I know I'm fine, and things like those. But you know, I'm a pacifist. Of course, darling, everything has to be discussed in democracy. Of course, darling, that is what you can see. But they are here killing ants and things like those. Of course, darling, to let us without sleep. Of course, darling, they wanna hurt us with some guns, and they Of course, darling, they wanna hurt us with some guns and they wanna keep our hearts in Troy. Of course, they're in Troy, they want our hearts and our lives and they want that we give them the heart. Of course, darling, that is what you can see. They wanna keep it away from us. Of course, darling, that is what you can see. That they are after us, trying to keep our hearts in Troy and things like those. Of course, that is what you can see. But I think everyone has to have 30 kids, of course, darling, because your life is yours, of course, darling, that is what you can see, that is what I believe, of course, darling, that is what you can see, that is what I believe, that you don't have to hurt people, you have to let them have their sleep, of course, darling, that is what you can see, that letting without sleep is a torture and prison, of course, darling, that is what you can see, of course, darling, that is what you can see, and you have to let the people have 30 kids, of course, darling, that is what you can see. So they have everything they want, of course, darling, that is what you can see, of course, darling, so they can give their lives and then give their heart to someone and try, of course, darling. There are too many, of course, darling, and they're killing ants and things like those to keep us without sleep and things like those, of course, darling. They are crazy, of course, darling. Keep the code is called, of course, darling. That is what you can see. That they are there, of course, darling. That is what you can see. So go on. Of course, darling, keep the code, it's cold. Of course, darling, you know that, so come on. Of course, darling, that is what you can see. Give me a kiss, let me dance with you a little bit. Let me give you a kiss. Of course, darling, let me give you some cold so you don't feel cold. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that you can feel fine. Of course, darling, you know we want red honey. Of course, darling, that is what you can see. Of course, darling, that is what you can feel, that no one can against us. We want some peace, but the peace don't come, and every time the war comes on. Of course, darling, that is what you can see. It's dark and cold and rainy. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that we have to forget about them. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that I wanna give you a kiss and that you feel fine. Of course, darling, that is what you can feel and see, that everything is gonna be fine and that we're gonna forget about them and that we're gonna have everything we want. Of course, darling, that is what you can see. Give me a kiss, take the cold, let us go away from everyone and that they don't hurt us. And of course, darling, keep the cold. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that I wanna give you a kiss and that everything is well. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that we can keep warm here. Of course, darling, that is what you can see. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that no one can against us, that I wanna give you a kiss and dance with you a little bit. Of course, darling, I'm a little sad, but I'm not that. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that I wanna keep that and take care of my life. Of course, darling, that is what you can say. Thank you for giving him what we want. Of course, darling, that is what you can say, that we are gonna be fine and that no one is gonna hurt us and that we are gonna be well. Of course, darling.